get together in order to use and have a better understanding of what tools and resources we have available to share for our efforts towards advocacy. And just for some housekeeping rules, we are recording this meeting so we can share it also afterwards with people that were not able to join because of different reasons, and it will be available for other advocates to access the information. So as for Women for Global Fund, we are also very happy to welcome you here today, and we will be launching today's agenda immediately. So please feel free to also react and share your questions or comments during the meeting on the chat, and we will be able to manage those as we read them. So thank you, Alana. Just can we go to the next slide? So just for your information, we are also conducting this meeting on French, specifically in Spanish. So we will have some specific sessions on the 19th, this 19 on this week. Two different sessions will be conducted, one in French and the other one in Spanish. So please feel free to share also with your broader networks of colleagues that probably will need this specific language webinar. So happy to have you also on that next Wednesday, this Thursday. Please, next one. And today's agenda is composed by 5 specific topics we are going to be talking today, and we're going to start and have Alana also talking in the next upcoming slides, and we will have a broader understanding and context of why we should be engaging this specific moment more with the Global Fund, and how to work with the CCMs and the structures, navigate this complex process that we know are more challenging than before, how to use data, why to use the data, which resources we can share for the advocacy and the community engagement, and we will open space also for discussion. And please, again, feel free to reach out and put your comments and questions during the chat so we can also read those and discuss during the meeting. Next, please. And just to start, let's talk about the CCM and why it's important to have this engagement together with the country coordinating mechanisms. And as for Women for Global Fund, we also want to share the specific tool we have developed to become more effective Global Fund country coordinating mechanism members. And in this short guide that we have produced in November last year, we want to make things easier for advocates to understand how to navigate the CCM. I see some of you have already a broader experience with CCM, but this guide is connected to both advocates with lots of experience and new upcoming members, or people that are engaged in global fund process that want to be included in the CCM. And this guide helps advocates understand the CCM dynamics with some specific key points and strategically push for the correct and the community-led HTM, HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, gender, human rights, and community approaches to put these priorities into action. And this guide also facilitates how decisions, to better understand how decisions are made and who are the key stakeholders we can engage to identify priorities, key entry points, and put our community-led responses within the priorities we want to hear and see in the current prioritization process, yes, but also in the upcoming Grand Cycle 8 that we are going to undergo. Just probably, can we just mute yourselves while we are explaining this, and we will open up a session of questions and answers. This guide is also important as we also connect with other members who have more experience on CCMs, and in these specific crucial moments, we are needing to engage more with our advocates that are representing civil society organization, community, and key populations in these discussions. And we are suggesting to use one of these tools. Next slide. And I will give the floor now to also Alana. She will be talking about why use this data for advocacy, and we will complement from that. Alana?
You, Angela. So why is this webinar important is I just want to start. I mean, as Angela says, and as everyone in this call knows, the CCM is a very important thing for the Global Fund. It's based in countries, it's a place for decision making. And so obviously the CCM has an important role. It is responsible for submitting the funding requests. It's responsible for selecting who the principal recipients are who will receive the funding. And it's also responsible for doing grant oversight of the grant implementation. And what's particularly important for the CCMs is that according to Global Fund policies, they are required to include representatives who are members of communities and key populations. So this is an important space for advocacy. And so when doing advocacy with the CCM, I think to me, some of the reasons it's important to use data is that when you're using, quantitative data, financial data, things like that, it makes your messages much stronger. And so it's much more believable than if you have maybe a personal story or an anecdote or things you've heard from other people. Um, I think with the Global Fund, one thing that helps a lot is speaking the same language as the people who are making decisions. And so they can act on things that are data in a format that they understand. We can talk more about that. And I think also when you maybe are seeing things in real life, if you can find in the data, about the Global Fund's data, what the underlying cause is, it can help you explain what's happening and advocate for a change. And also, I think the most important thing you'll see is that the Global Fund data are not perfect, and maybe they're not the most, they're maybe the exact right data point, or maybe they're not the most up to date, or they're not exactly perfect. But what it does allow you to do is to go to the CCM, to other members of the CCM, and ask questions that hopefully can help. Um, so just some examples of what this looks like. I think on the left, this is maybe a weaker advocacy message to say, we need more funding for community-based prep programs for sex workers. And on the right, the alternative is to bring in a lot more information in Global Fund language that I think makes a stronger case. So being able to say that, from cycle to cycle, there's maybe a 50% cut from this amount to this amount, but we can look at target data and see that this program is performing very well. And so that's why we need to have more funding for prep programs. Maybe as your CCM is selecting the PR, you could say we'd like to have a stronger role for the local civil society PR to take over TB prevention. And if you can say that in the last cycle, the partner who's currently doing TB prevention only spent or absorbed 40% of the money and only 26% of the TB prevention budget, but the local civil society PR has an 85% performance rate and is known and trusted by communities, this can be a stronger message. And then last one is as you're doing grant oversight at the CCM level of PR performance, you might know from your community that the government PR has not done a good job, but being able to look at the data and say there are 4 PRs in the country, the government PR has reached only 45% of its targets for KP programs, and we can look over time and see that this performance has only gotten worse, so we need change. So I think these are kind of the examples of when you're engaging with the CCM and the Secretariat where how data can be very helpful. And so some of the resources we'll share today, I'm sure there are many others, so we'll just talk about a few of them today. But I just want to say one of the reasons why we're talking about this today. One is on the left, this is the RISE study. So it's a civil society-led research study about CCMs and community engagement. And one of the findings that came out of this was that it's very, very hard to access information at the CCM because often you as maybe the community representative have to ask the PR to share reports with you and they maybe are late or they choose not to. And so sometimes it can be hard to make these data messages. And so we wanted to make tools that allow you to get data, even if the PR is not willing to share information with you, or it's hard to find it in other spaces. And then the last reason that it's important right now is, of course, the Global Fund is going through a reprioritization process at the moment. And so that means that we're doing this very intense exercise where we need to be protecting programs that are most important to communities. And it's important when you're doing that kind of an advocacy exercise to understand what's in the grants first and foremost. And in some countries, visibility into detailed grant information is very hard to access. And I'll also say that another thing that's new is that In the last year, the Global Fund has for the very first time released very detailed data about activities that are being funded and the amount of spending, the absorption of grants. And so this is meant to help us get access to those data. And so there are a few resources we can talk about. The Global Fund itself has what's called the Data Explorer, and this is a free online platform where you can get all kinds of information directly from Global Fund about how much has been, allocated, how much has been dispersed, some of the results data from the annual results. And so this is a space where you can look up your country and see specific information. So that's that data, theglobalfund.org. And then for people who like to use Excel more, there's also what's called the data service. And so this is a place where you can actually just download Excel sheets on things like how much is in the grants, what's the performance, and things like that. So that's also publicly available and provided by the Global Fund. And so that one is dataservice.theglobalfund.org. And then also for people who like more technical things, you can also on the data page, you can go down to the section about documents and find actually the original documents from like the funding requests and actually open up and look at those original documents. And I think one of the limitations is that not all of the documents are available. The grant documents are not available, but sometimes this can be helpful if you want to go back to the final funding request. So that one is also on the data.the Global Fund. And then the last one I want to talk about today in more detail is something that we've created, which is like a civil society owned version of this. So this is, we're calling it a CCM dashboard. And it takes the same data as the Global Fund uses, but it's meant to be in a format that's specifically for country partners, for CCM members, and those who are advocating to the CCM. So those are four of the big ones. If others have other ideas, we can hear about them in discussion too. And so what we've done is we've started putting some of these resources in one place. So if it's easier for people, so we're putting it on a web platform we're calling the Global Advocacy Data Hub. So it's easy to find materials all at once. So let me hand this over to Patrick to walk through what's in the CCM dashboard.
Thank you, Alana. And as Alana mentioned, this is kind of really focused on CCM advocacy. So it's all about the country level and maybe other resources that might show kind of different comparisons or across countries or different regions. So in this case, everything on here is going to be at the country level, and it has a wealth of information about the CCM members, about the grants over time, as well as just detailed budget information, which is probably useful to anyone kind of more broader than the CCM community. And if we can go to the next slide, we can dive into the dashboard. Yeah, so this section is centered around kind of asking some questions and showing how the tool can be used. And they start out simple, just kind of like who's who and what's what. And it goes down to actually how can you dive into the budgets and expenditure data that the Global Fund are releasing. So in this case, let's go to the next slide and think about maybe from the perspective of someone who doesn't know who's on the CCM. We just start out with a top level table. And this is not everyone who's on the CCM, but it is the people who are said to be on it. So you have the chairs, the focal points, hopefully some contact information for each country. And as the Global Fund releases updated data, that will trickle out to our dashboard. So potentially some of this is not everyone you're expecting to see, but it should be enough people that you can get the conversation started, find someone to reach out to. And then as the GIF comes back around, you'll see under the table is the portfolio manager, which is not someone on the CCM, but it's someone in the Global Fund Secretariat sitting in Geneva. So potentially you could escalate to them if you're not getting what you need. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, yes. And so another just very high level metric that sometimes people don't know is just my country, is it eligible for which disease? Maybe what's the disease burden? Are we transitioning out of funding eligibility? So let's go to the next slide and just see what that looks like. And so, yeah, for each country, there's sort of an explanation of what eligibility is because it can be a little bit complicated, but this is just high level that you and Tanzania are eligible for all 3 diseases. And that is updated once a cycle in the eligibility list. So that is kind of hard to scrape out, but we've done the work for you and it's just here, it's just high level. And we can move on to maybe something a little more in depth and interesting. Yeah, and so in some countries you have a bunch of different principal recipients, all with their own grants. In other countries, maybe it's focused more on like the government is leading the grants, and there might be one civil society grant. So it's oftentimes it's not easy to say which grants are active, what has happened in the past. And so we've made a timeline. If you go to the next slide, we can kind of look at it. So in this case, in Tanzania, if you're actually playing around, you'll see in the tooltip a much deeper view of the data, but at the high level, you kind of just see over time which grants have existed from the last few cycles in 2018 and the more recent cycle. And I think here, as we'll dive into later in the example, you'll see the bottom 3 bars are actually all from the government. I think I can't quite see, I think it's Ministry of Finance. And then the civil society grant is that top one in purple that has actually changed. So it's a different grant. And if you look into it a little more carefully, they've actually changed principal recipients. So you might find that to be useful information if you're doing advocacy around what's going on with the non-government part of global fund programming. So let's go to the next slide and kind of look at what these grants show. So in this case, this is a real story. Someone was thinking that grant activities were blocked from the civil society PR grant. And so much like on that timeline, it's interesting to see that the Global Fund did indeed change who is executing the grant. And so let's go to the next slide. Yep, okay, so we're on the right part of the GIF. This is just a high level view of a financial oversight chart. And this actually lets you dive down, it lets you start from the grant view. So you can see both the budget of the grant, so you can see the total envelope of what's been given to the PR, as well as over time, the current budget, as well as expenditures and absorption. So what happens is when the grants get made, you have the kind of the largest part of the bar, the total amount the grant should expect to receive over its life cycle. And then as data come in, as activities happen, as time goes on, the PR will report back to the Global Fund little portions of that money as things are happening. And so it sort of fills up the bar to hopefully complete the total budget. So expenditures and absorption are really important to see what's happening over time. In this case, we're trying to ask the question, like one of the grants seems to not be doing any of its activities, perhaps it was blocked. And so we will see that as this cycles back around, as one of the grants has no absorption, it has data reported, and then is indeed at this grant. So that bottom bar there is not filled up at all. And so that is indeed what we're looking for. And so absorption, you might expect it to be 100%, but oftentimes even a program that's working really well won't hit 100. So that's 80% might not be a cause for concern, but certainly 0 in the case where data are reported, but there has been no expenditure is something that you might want to escalate and communicate with your CCM members and actually start a conversation about what might be happening there. In this case, we're having the government is receiving its funds and doing its programming, but the civil society PR is not. And so let's go to the next slide. Yeah, another kind of related question is like, who's doing what? We've seen a lot of ways you can, in that previous chart, dive down deep into the grant. You can actually get down all the way from the component level, HIV, TB, malaria, down into like specific interventions in that chart. And under that chart, we've recently added a data download tool, which is helpful to take the information in the dashboard and actually take it to some other conversations. So let's go to the next slide and kind of see what that looks like. Thank you. So this is under that other chart at the very bottom of our page is a new tool that allows you in a similar way to kind of select, maybe I'm interested in modules, grants, principal recipients in particular. And then this tool lets you kind of go all the way down if you want, or if you're interested in a higher level view, because that might be useful to you, it aggregates it up. So you don't have to do any of the math. You don't have to download a bunch of Excels from the Global Fund, and you can just, hopefully, as you see as this GIF rolls around, export the tool that you're in, or export the data. That's exactly what you're seeing. So in this case, the GIF is basically filtering down to an intervention that is, or I guess the module for community activity. So things like community-led monitoring. And in the case of Tanzania, we're seeing that the budget for community-led monitoring and similar interventions is under the government grant. So that's probably something to, not necessarily a cause for concern, but it certainly is interesting and is worth the conversation. And so our tool lets you take that information, and it has all the other useful metrics that would probably facilitate a conversation about this and export it out so you can use it away from the dashboard for whatever is useful for you. Okay, so next slide. And that is the end for my section. Thank you, Alana.
Thank you. And Angela, back to you.
Thank you, Patrick, for explanation. Now we are going to talk about resources and tools for community engagement and what we have been seeing currently in the dashboard and how to use the financial and quantitative data is very much related to how we are going to, as advocates, mobilize and influence global fund decisions in this current specific challenging moments, but also thinking ahead for the grand cycle 8 and how the priorities that are shaping our needs as civil society relations are extremely important to be currently knowing more than ever how to use and have this in our radar so we can really use it. So can we go to next slide, please? And just wanted to share also that as for Women for Global Fund, we have created around 60 advocacy briefs and technical tools. All of them are available and have been jointly produced with specific partners from HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. And these tools are equipping and support and trying to support advocates to navigate and have already resources that are connected to the different topics that can be interesting for communities and CSOs to navigate specific advocacy spaces, and they are connected to also Global Fund process. And those are also available in what we call the digital dossier, in which we have not only put what we have produced as organization, but a movement, but also we have compiled information and resources from our partners. So if you also want your resources and your documents to be also included, please don't hesitate to reach out so we can also include in the digital dossier information around the Global Fund and how to navigate the different process. And this is also an effort connected to what Alana and Patrick were mentioning before on how to better use the data and compile as much as we can the resources we know from our advocates and the efforts we have been joining together in the past so we can access in one place hopefully and get more information as it comes in an easy and friendly way because sometimes we know global fund information can be complex extend and difficult to navigate all the time. And the next slide please. And also talking about this specific tools, we want to just complement the use of the data with some other important guides, as for example, navigating the Grand Cycle 7. We know we are in a specific time in which some changes are coming and reprioritization is happening, but majority also of the ideas will be still there. And we will be using probably this and updating the guides for Grand Cycle 8 with the upcoming changes. And this is also an effort to see how we can keep on continuing advocating for what life-saving means from different perspectives, including the feminist perspective, but moreover with community rights and gender priorities to be included in the specific negotiations and process that are currently undergoing under Grand Cycle 7, also thinking ahead of Grand Cycle 8. And we also invite you to access YouTube pages in which you can find all the webinars and all this information that has been flowing and also other spaces of mentorship, capacity building, and spaces for knowledge sharing that we have been putting in place for you to access independently of the time that those are or the time zones you are. So please feel free to just be in contact and access YouTube channels, social media also for different movements that can put in this information for you to be easy and accessible. The next one, please. And we have also developed more resources and have just recently launched a consultation. And this key resources that we have compiled also thanks to our partners and thanks to many other advocates and colleagues that have been working extensively to put resources, as Alana and also Patrick mentioned, but also the community delegations and other delegations from the Global Fund Board have been very actively working to put in place resources letters, documents that can guide and support advocates in the different process so we can really navigate and have a better understanding of how to influence and put communities' rights and gender priorities within the three diseases components. And here you can see and access afterwards also like all the documents also specifically for women and girls in this case, but it's also in a broader understanding of what is important for communities, why it's important for us to be extremely engaged and have probably 3 steps to be 3 steps ahead of the processes, and knowing the data, knowing the context, and having also all this understanding might help us to get more engaged with the different CCM members and also coordinate better with and represent better our civil society and key populations. Also invite you to be part of this last consultation that was launched together with ICW Global, in which we want to hear from you also what are the priorities that we can include, and we need to advocate better together as networks, as movements. So happy to also receive your feedback and comments around what are the key specific priorities we need to take more consideration. And we know that there are so many. That's why it's important to also have a broader dissemination and understanding of what are the needs according to the context and regions we are trying to also get more. The next slide, please, just to open up also for questions and answers. Also, there's another way to connect with us, and we are also welcoming you to please join as an advocate. Here you can find the QRs to just scan with your phone and join as an advocate. We also share information and all the resources that are available in the newsletter. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, please scan also with your phone the QR. We're going to send the links, but you can scan with your phone the QR connected to the digital dossier, in which we've also put information not only about this current specific Grand Cycle 7, but for all the advocacy efforts that have been in place around the guides that have developed, but also resources from our partners, as I mentioned, and key evidence-based information that we can use in the different moments to advocate for community rights and gender to be included in the different processes with the Global Fund. Again, just to let you know, please, if you have any other resources that are useful and you want the visibility from your efforts as organizations and communities, please do reach out so we can also put this information in these spaces. And the next one, please. And now I will just give up the space for Alana and also Patrick, so we can also hear from you and answer questions from your side. So this is a moment in which we will be opening the floor for discussion, and thank you for being here today with us. We'll continue with this topic of the discussion. So happy to open up for questions.
Thank you, Angela. And I did want to share, I mean, we're welcome, anyone's welcome to share any questions or comments, but I think some things that we were thinking about were, first of all, what are the most important needs that you have? And I think what we want, like, what are the needs right now, maybe during the GC7 reprioritization exercise, and then also thinking ahead to the grant cycle 8. What are the needs that people are going to be having? Because we're hoping that we can be creating new resources, adding to this platform with things that people need. And then I think, you know, is the amount of information people are receiving, is it enough, too much? Are there ways that we can be doing a better job of getting information out? And then, yeah, I mean, are there things that are very hard to get from the PR and the CCM that would be really helpful to find other ways of accessing? And then the last one is that, you know, everyone doesn't need to be a data expert. And so is there support that people need now during the reprioritization or looking ahead to grant cycle 8 with using and analyzing and turning data into advocacy messages? So let's open up the floor if people have questions or comments, or you can put in the chat too.
Ja, jeg er ikke sikker, men kanskje.
I see Lizzie and then Asia.
Sure. Thanks, Alana and Patrick. Just a quick one. In terms of the platform being updated, because I know data right now is going to be very crucial when it comes to reprioritization, and we need to figure out how much is remaining, what hasn't been used, etc. I was just wanted to hear from you guys, how updated is the platform, and are you getting more data and updating it, or are you also facing challenges of some information not being, like available to you to update on the platform?
Yeah, Patrick, do you want to take that?
I can just, from a technical perspective, our system is grabbing what's available from the Global Fund every morning. That being said, like data availability might have different bottlenecks. And part of that is the Global Fund will receive data from the PR and then validate it. So they have a more up-to-date kind of like less clean version of the data they might use internally. And so every so often they'll release a big batch of data. And that might be at the country level. So each country might have a different data availability. What I have done is under the charts, I've labeled that I pulled it today from their system. And then also, as far as their system is concerned, when the data were created. So you can see when it's from. And you might even see the data are from now, but the PR hasn't like itself given the Global Fund the info. So like the answer to that question is complicated. But if the Global Fund has released it publicly, we have it in our system at least in the next day. So it's as up to date as we can get it. And certainly, hopefully as this gets used more and more, our tool or even just the data the Global Fund are releasing, maybe they would feel more comfortable streamlining some parts of that process that they can. So it's as up to date as we can get it.
And I also just want to say, I think it's a good point that when you're using these data points, it's likely that people will say, oh, we have a slightly more up-to-date version as their PR or something. And I think that that's something just to be aware of. And it doesn't mean that the data aren't useful, because if 6 months ago the absorption was 10%, and they say now it's a little bit higher, fine, it's still good to ask the question of what's going on with this grant. Why is it not performing? So I think it's not perfect data, but I hope that it's usable to be able to ask questions that are helpful. Asia, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to build on something Lizzie was saying about how up to date the data are. So we all know that GC7 deallocation and reprioritization and slowing down conversations and negotiations are happening. And the struggle I think we have is that even as we get better clarity on the data, the cuts and everything that's being proposed are happening in an opaque way or in a way that's not transparent and democratic. So I think one barrier that we have to tackle is how we can even use data that we synthesize when we don't have accurate information in every country about what's being put on the chopping block. So I think we need suggestions about best practices and what's worked in terms of escalation so that we can try it in lots of different countries urgently, since we know these discussions are happening now, and then bring data to bear as we push. And then the second point is about what seems like a pretty powerful tool, although it's not one size fits all, about activity funding streams that haven't been well absorbed so far. So I wonder if there could be a sort of straightforward sorting of the portfolio so that we see PRs and areas of investment where absorption is lowest per country and per PR down to the highest, so that we can all, as advocates, get a sort of at a glance sense of some of that data. And then if it's helpful, communities at the country level can, with context, because again, it's not one size fits all, but with context, use that as a point of pressure and a talking point. If a PR and a country team is coming forward and saying, well, no, we need to make massive cuts to this community intervention, even though this RSSH intervention by government is absorbing really, really poorly. So I wonder about proactively arming all of us with that kind of overall absorption data, and then some observations about context and like caveats. I think that can help us try to accelerate advocacy against what are really tough challenges, frankly. Thanks.
Thanks, Asia. And maybe I can kick us off to say that one thing that we've done in a few countries has been to take the Global Fund budget data and align it with the guidance that the Global Fund has released. And the Global Fund has very specifically said activities that should be prioritized and which activities could be deprioritized. And so if that's a useful tool to people, we can produce an analysis, like a report that says, here are the 30 or 40 interventions Global Fund has said must be prioritized. Here's the amount that's in that budget, and here's which PR it's with and how it's been absorbing. If that's a tool, because then you can see if they try to propose to cut those activities, Global Fund has said no, and also you can start having those discussions as you're saying about absorption. So I think that's maybe one thing, maybe others, we can hear from others about ideas. And I also want to say there's going to be a big challenge around transparency around what's deprioritized, I think. And this will be very important going into grant cycle 8, where if activities are cut, it'll be a high priority to reprioritize those activities for the grant cycle 8. And so one thing that we've been thinking about, and it'd be great to hear thoughts and brainstorm together over the coming months, is thinking about ways of maybe supporting if people have internal documents like funding request drafts or data from what was deprioritized. So we can not just publicly available Global Fund data, but if people want to share documents with us, we can help to analyze those and turn them into resources you can use for grant cycle 8 advocacy. So I think that's one of the things we've been thinking about. But I don't know if anyone else wants to add, or I can turn to Robin. And also, sorry, I see the comment in the chat just quickly to say that one of the things we're doing is helping, all of us have been helping to escalate around grant cycle 7 reprioritization. And so let me share some information if you'd like to speak more, Maxwell, we can support with that. Over to you, Robin.
Thanks so much, Alana. I was just typing it in the chat, but I thought it would be faster just to raise my hand. This tool, honestly, is fantastic. I use it all the time. I'm wondering, because it's got such a great baseline, if we can continually update it through our own community networks, getting in touch with you as the country funding deallocation envelopes start coming out. If we can also, where you have the contact information at the very top, if it would be possible to add a line in there so that everyone has access as much as possible to what that deallocation number is. And then I really love the idea about how we can set this up for the greatest success in using it for grant cycle 8 country proposal development processes. So would be really interested in working together with you on that. Thanks.
I see a thumbs up from Angela. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that or.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important, as we have been saying, and Robin, thanks for mentioning also this. I think what is also very crucial is to have a combination of efforts connected to what evidence-based information we also have, for example, from CLM efforts. What do we have from what the available evidence is already that have been put into documents, statement, policy briefs, and how we can connect also this to this data specifically of the grants and how it's the Global Fund specifically implementing programs and projects within the country, so we can have a combination of advocacy effort that can put these priorities of communities' rights and gender again into the conversation and not being deprioritized, as we know that this is a moment in which those are going probably to be the first to be considered to be out. So in this specific moment, we really need to be more cautious and more active and aware of how to use this data. And I think the combination of the resources and all the efforts of the different advocates and communities is extremely important to also avoid duplication. And that's why we also want to hear from you on how do you think the amount of information also from CSOs, from organizations as movement are flowing to you, all advocates, as also accessing all this and understanding and navigating all this process can be complex. So probably wanted to also open up a bit on this question that we also had for discussion today on how do you think it can be better, on how we can also disseminate beyond, webinars, meeting sessions, WhatsApp groups? What do you think it might be also useful for advocates to complement and have a better flow of communication and accessing this complete sources and document resources?
Thank you, Angela. And I'll also share just to say, here's everyone's contact information, and I think we'll be doing more thinking going ahead, looking ahead to grant cycle 8 and as the grant cycle 7 happens. So anyone who has ideas or thoughts, please reach out. Any other questions or thoughts or things that people need that they don't have? I think that I see the comment, Kwame, about CCM meeting calendars and about CCM meeting information. And just to say that this is not something that is publicly available online, so we wouldn't be able to put it into a dashboard, but we can definitely help to work together to engage with the CCM members and work with the learning hubs and so on to help with that. So please also feel free to reach out and we can support as best we can.
Sorry, just to add up on the CCM calendars and the meeting information, there are some templates we have also put into the CCM guide that you can access, where we have specific letters on how to contact the CCM focal points and the representatives, and there are some links that you can access also to navigate better these connections. So please go to the CCM guide that we have presented today, and you will find specific links that connect us with other advocates and other partners. And also, if helpful, we also have kind of advocates that we have mapped from CCM representatives, and probably depending on the country, we can connect you with some CCM members already in there and help this connection to build and be stronger from communities to have access to this information and support transparency and accountability. So if anything that we can help specifically for some countries, we can check the database we have as for our CCM members and representatives. Can you go ahead, Robin?
Thanks. So just in response to that, one of the ideas might be to, because they're on the contact information for each country, there is the contact information for the fund portfolio manager. So rather than bombarding the fund portfolio manager with emails requesting the access to the CCM meeting schedule, one idea might be to, together with other community and civil society partners in the country, to, as a group, write to the fund portfolio manager and copy in some of your civil society, global civil society partners, like the ones that are here on the screen, to demand that CCM meeting schedule. So if you're not getting information from the CCM chair, from any of the technical partners who might be working with you on this, then go straight to the fund portfolio manager as a group and demand the schedule. Thanks.
Thanks. I think that's right. It's not all the answers are not going to be there, but there are ways that you can use this to help ask questions, I think is the idea. And like I said, please reach out also because we can connect you with CCM members. Also, we can connect you with learning hubs who do a lot of support around this and connect you with people in the CRG who are also important. So we can help to point people in the right direction.
Just as Alana, maybe as we have some more minutes left today, I'm wondering if there is any other questions or if you want again to see any country specific information or something that can be illustrative for today's, if there's anyone interested in that, maybe.
And another discussion question I have, I mean, we've said for grant cycle 8, but for those people who have been in the funding request development process before and have been part of the country consultations and the community consultations and so on, I mean, looking back, were there things that would have helped you to do stronger advocacy in that space? Because we have, 6 months until this begins, really, so we can develop all kinds of support tools, reports, visualizations, and so on. Okay, well, I'm not hearing any other thoughts. I don't know if anyone had any last closing remarks. Otherwise, maybe we can give people back their time and I think everyone's welcome to have a look. We'll send out the links to everyone who joined today and our contact information. And so please, feel free to share the resources. And um, and sorry, I'm seeing a few more questions. Yeah, and I also, I mean, just to say, I see the question from Robin. On this website, the Global Advocacy Data Hub, you can also find other resources. So there's a document about how to engage in the GC7 reprioritization. There's some templates in there for engaging on that process. So there are other resources there. It's all in the same place if people want to reach out or have a look and then reach out if there are any other questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alana, also for mentioning that. I think as I said before, we are going to also keep on updating the digital dossier with different advocacy documents, efforts, and guides that your organizations and civil society and communities have produced. So please also feel free to share those things with me so we can collect and put those also in the specific created place for Global Fund advocacy data. And I think one of the ways that again, reiterating a bit and wrapping up today's, I think it's very important for us to know this information. And we also know that this can be a lot of information. So please reach out so we can better navigate country-specific cases and see how to support in the upcoming days. And of course, thinking ahead on Grand Cycle 8. I think from my side, I thank you so much, Alana, and also Patrick, for getting together. And I thank you all the participants for your engagement and your participation. Very happy to continue this conversation further. And just reminding that we will be having also this webinar on Spanish and French on the 19th of June. Be sharing also additional information for the specific Spanish and French webinars.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. And talk soon.